We're in Romans chapter 1. Hey, if there is a God, or if there is no God, I should say, if there is no God, why do people like you believe in Him or believe in a God? Many of the great philosophers have sought to answer that question. The popular argument is that for us who believe in God, God is something of a psychological crutch. Life without purpose, without meaning, without any transcendent touch point would be too threatening, and so men and women must kind of imagine a God who is there watching over us. Well, that makes sense. I think I rather agree if we grant the argument it's presupposition, which I certainly do not, because the presupposition was if there is no God. But what is rarely pondered by humans is the other side of this question. If there is a God, why are there atheists? Why do so many deny that central reality? Well, our sixth study in Paul's letter to the Romans is our second look at this brilliant portion of Scripture, which begins in chapter 1, verse 18. We'll read through the end of the chapter. So follow with me. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them, for they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural, and in the same way also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men, committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they knew the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. In the reading of God's Word. So last time we saw how the wrath of God is currently being manifest in the self-destructive, crazy behavior that characterizes so many on this broken planet. We saw that the wrath of God towards sin results in what we call judicial hardening. There was wrath and there was reprobation, resulting in sexual insanity and many other perverse behaviors. Today we're going to consider three more of the R's. We're going to look at revelation, responsibility, and rejection. Now, your outline for this Sunday, it did not make it into your bulletin. We'll fix that next week, but you got to create your own, so see if you can do that. And we'll show you the end result at the end. Deb's got the slide we'll put up at the end. We have seen what results from the wrath of God. Today we see the basis for it, which is found largely in verses 18 to 21. A quick review there. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Well, Pastor, I just don't understand how it is that God can hold people responsible for rejecting Christ if they have never heard of Christ. You ever heard that objection to our faith? The innocent native in Africa argument it's really, as arguments against Christianity go, not a particularly hard one. Because the answer is that God never holds anyone responsible for those things they have no way of knowing. No, never. Does that mean that the native in Africa who died without hearing of Jesus avoids judgment? No. The apostle here presents us with an exceedingly clear word on the basis for divine judgment. Humans will be judged on the basis of what they did not, or what they did know. What they did know. That's a biblical principle. And the more light that someone has, the more responsible they are. But what Paul is telling us is that every human being of normal intelligence at least bears moral responsibility, because every human has known something of the living and the true God. You look at the language used in our text. Verse 18 says that men suppress the truth. Now, before you can suppress something, you must first what? Before you can suppress the truth, you must first know the truth. Verse 19 says men do have the truth because there are theological realities which God Himself made evident to them. Verse 21 says that fallen sinners actually know God. Now that language can be confusing for us because normally you and I speak of knowing God. We speak of those who live their life in a personal communion with the Lord as those who know God. But here it just means that people know deep down, they are actually alert of His reality, regardless of what they may say and regardless of what they may do with that particular awareness of God. From whence cometh this awareness of God that is evident within them? The text doesn't say it, but I can't help but think it has something to do with how we are made, created by God in His image. It's as if God's reality is sort of stamped on our consciousness from the outset by how we are made. Yeah, but where Paul also points us is toward creation. Verse 20 again. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, eternal power, divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Common people, like us, have always been puzzled by how anyone can look at the world around us and not believe in a designer, in a creator. The very notion that a world as finely tuned as ours, as vast as ours, as delicate and complex and as beautiful and mysterious as ours, how all of that could just show up without a grand designer, rightly strikes most of us as utterly ludicrous. That is a feeling that is more than just sentimental, it is biblical. We read Psalm 19 earlier. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of His hands. Day to day pours forth speech, night to night reveals knowledge. If great mountains or a beautiful sunset or the smile of your baby moves you to worship God, it is because they reveal a portion of who He is and what He is. Sophisticated thinkers like to roll their eyes at such a popular sentiment as that, but they can never refute the simple logic of normal folks who think it is the atheist who is crazy for denying what seems to us to be obvious. Whittaker Chambers in 1952 wrote about his transition from a communist atheist to a devoted Christian. And he writes this: "My daughter was in her high chair. I was watching her eat. She was the most miraculous thing that had ever happened in my life. I liked to watch her even when she smeared porridge on her face or dropped it on the floor. My eye came to rest on the delicate convolutions of her ear, those intricate and perfect ears. The thought passed through my mind: No, those years were not created by any chance coming together of atoms in nature. They could have been created only by immense design. The thought was involuntary and unwanted. I crowded it out of my mind. I had to crowd it out of my mind. If I had completed it, I should have had to say, design presupposes God, end quote. And of course, the universe, the grand design of the universe and all of its numberless parts requires a designer. God is utterly necessary to explain what is. Imagine that you are driving through South Dakota. I've never done that. Anybody here driven through South Dakota? A few of you have. You're driving through South Dakota when you come upon a mountain bearing the unmistakable likeness of not one, not two, not three, but 4 presidents of the United States. Would you conclude, would anyone conclude that those shapes are just the product of wind and rain or even glacial erosion? Of course not. The implications of a designer are obvious to all of us. All the science and all the evolutionary theories in the world cannot change that. Robert Jastrow is the former author, professor at Columbia, director of NASA's Goddard Institute on Space Studies, and he admits that science has no answer to the question of ultimate causes. Evolution doesn't even address the issue of ultimate causality. Evolution speaks of development, not cosmic origins. Jastrow writes, and I quote, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." So Paul argues that people know a great deal about God from the creation. Clearly they can see that he is brilliant beyond words, that he is infinitely powerful. You can also see how he provides for his creatures in so many ways. All that we need to sustain our life is available in the rest of creation. Then there are the evidences, interestingly, of his displeasure. There's the storms and the earthquakes, these awesome displays of power, but also awesome displays of wrath on a rebel planet. What else might be included in this knowledge of God? Well, I cannot say, but I can say that it is clearly enough to undercut any excuse-making on the part of sinners. The revelation of God in creation leads to the responsibility of men before the court of heaven. So you got revelation, you got responsibility. The revelation of God leads to the responsibility of men before the court of heaven. We are without excuse. We cannot plead ignorance. This is repeated in verse 32 of our text, where we read that human sin was committed not in ignorance, but in the awareness of what is right and what is wrong. Call it the image of God, call it conscience, but know that humans are responsible moral agents who at some level know that their conduct has been indefensible. Some certainly know more than others. Some, therefore, are more responsible because they're more aware. Jesus said that there would be special condemnation on Judgment Day for those humans who were alive when he was alive in Galilee, those who saw his miracles, those who actually heard Jesus' sermons. Their privilege, he said, brought added responsibility. But who exactly is going to be able to plead ignorance on Judgment Day? No one who can read or understand the apostles' words can ever do that. The revelation of God in creation, it gets through. It's not simply available. He says it gets through, and that revelation makes us responsible. So humans had the truth, says Paul. What happened? What did they do with that truth? Did they say, "Oh God, you are worthy and awesome"? Did they ask that God who spoke worlds into existence to guide them in their living? Did they confess their sin and seek his mercy? We are told that men did not honor God and did not give thanks. Instead, what did they do? They suppressed the truth. As we would put it today, they canceled God. They unfollowed God. They kicked him off their platform. They smothered his truth. The word is suppress, and suppress means, to hold down. It's a term that we use in psychology. It means you push something to the bottom of your psyche, deep into your subconscious, and you cover it up. You bury it with make-believe and with lies. And human beings do this kind of thing with certain traumatic events in our lives. Those who have had terrifying events like watching someone burn to death, for example, will suppress such memories as that to the point that, in a few years, they can't remember. They know it, and yet they don't know it. They find that hypnosis sometimes can bring stuff out that has been suppressed deep in one's psyche for many, many years, and even lost as far as conscious knowledge goes. And this is what happens with so many unregenerate people. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness. But why? Why? Just as the mind can forget traumatic events, it forgets God, suppresses the truth about God, in a sense, because it does not want to remember God. To think about God, that's uncomfortable. Such thoughts, such realities interfere with my own self-rule, with my own pride. John Stott writes this: they have made an a priori decision to live for themselves rather than for God and others, and therefore deliberately stifle a truth which challenges their self-centeredness. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, said it plainly: there can be no God because if there is, man is not free. So the existence of a personal and moral deity interferes with the working out of my own sinful desires and lusts. Psalm 10 puts it this way: for the wicked boast of his heart's desire, and the greedy man curses and spurns the Lord. The wicked in the haughtiness of his countenance does not seek him. All his thoughts are, say it with me, there is no God. That's what he says. And then he invents vocabulary to support this. He speaks of the power of chance plus time. He speaks of nature and the things that nature has done. He speaks of fate, anything but a personal God to whom I am accountable. To admit that there's a God is to come face to face with this thing we call judgment, and sinners run from that psychologically. But the running from God psychologically, it leaves us guilty and it leaves us blamable morally. Verse 18 says the suppression of truth is carried out in unrighteousness. And when we talk about these things, we are penetrating to the heart of our fallenness, the heart of our sinfulness. In a sense, every sin we commit is a manifestation of our basic rejection of God. See, when I want to tell a lie, my first step is to shut down any thoughts about God. In essence, I want to first of all block God from my thinking. You can see Psalm 10 describing how this works in the thinking of the wicked. They say, there is no God. God doesn't know. He doesn't know. I'll get away with this. And the self-deceit takes root sufficiently to clear the runway for the sin to take off. But no matter what the sin, it all starts with our disposition toward our sovereign Creator. Let me say that again. No matter what the sin, it all starts with our disposition toward our sovereign Creator. Look at how Paul describes the inner working of sinful hearts. They do not honor Him. They do not give thanks to Him. They wanted to take credit for all the things good in their lives, and they wanted to blame God for their deprivations. Verse 23 speaks of this grand exchange. They exchanged our glorious God for stupid idols because those idols were not so morally exacting. Verse 25 says they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Remember who is the father of lies. They preferred the darkness. They preferred the lies. They preferred the deceit. They were more comfortable with that Verse 28 says they did not see fit to acknowledge God. And in all these ways, Paul is telling us that what he will later make plain in Romans 5 and then again in Romans 8, where we read that we were enemies of God, where we were hostile to Him. The general disposition of fallen sinners toward a holy God is that they simultaneously hate Him and deny His existence. Now, most people react to that by saying, come on, I'm not hostile to God. And I don't deny you're probably not aware of that hostility, maybe not to some imaginary God that you've devised, but how about the God of the Scriptures? Consider His attributes. R.C. Sproul notes that men hate God's sovereignty. Do you like it that God is in charge and not you? That God can tell you what to do and not the other way around? I don't think you do. Do you like it that God is all-knowing, that He's omniscient, that you cannot escape His knowledge of what you're doing, where you are, even your inner thoughts? You like that? I would guess not. Jonathan Edwards even said that men hate God's immutability. Well, that's an interesting thing to hate about God. He never changes, and that bugs us. A few years back, I was doing some street witnessing at the Pittsburgh Art Festival, and I got into a conversation with this woman, and I asked her what she would do or what she would say to God if she encountered Him at judgment, and she told me, I would say that I hope He's changed His mind on a few things. I thought that was an interesting answer. And when I probed about what few things, she says, some of those prohibitions against certain sexual choices. I'm like, oh, okay. I hear you. She doesn't like the idea of God being immutable. He needs to get with the times. He needs to get on the right side of history. If you're following this, you'll understand that the human rejection of God, it's not rooted in our mental inabilities. It's not our incapacity to grasp that God is. It's not some calculation that God has not given us ample reason to believe in Him. No. Our rejection of God is rooted in a commitment to our own autonomy and our own hostility to all that He is. John Piper puts it this way: why did they reject the truth and suppress the truth and not love the truth? Because they took pleasure in unrighteousness. When you love sin, you cannot love the truth. The truth is too threatening. It threatens to take away your illicit pleasures. I would venture to say that virtually all falsehood comes from this, a stronger affection for the pleasures of sin. That is what unrighteousness is, loving sin more than loving God and His truth. Now, understand that many of us are not aware we're doing this. We may seek out other explanations for our assertions. We may even convince ourselves that those explanations are actually legitimate. You think about this, when you hear someone in a religious context or a political context, maybe a personal context, you hear them say something that strikes you as bizarre, as totally nonsensical, and we hear more of this nowadays than ever before, don't we? I do. Do you ever wonder whether that person actually believes what they are saying? You wonder about that? For me, this happens most often in a political context. I will routinely hear a politician or a commentator say something that just seems so obviously false that it is rather stunning. And I wonder to myself, is this person a fool or a liar? Do they believe what they are saying? Sometimes they do. Sometimes they know that they're lying, and they're fine with doing so. And sometimes maybe it's somewhere in between. It could be a mixture. Like the teenage girl who told her mom, hey, if my boyfriend wasn't a good guy, why would he be doing 500 hours of community service? You get the sense that in a more thoughtful moment, they would admit to the self-deceit. But the affirmation of lies is typically rooted in personal corruption that distorts my thinking and thus my believing and thus my speaking. So curiously, Paul suggests that the downward slide into aggravated depravity that we'll say more about next Sunday started with the failure to give God thanks or to give God honor. Wow, that is so profound. It takes us way back to the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 3, with our first parents. There they were in a paradise made by God for their delight. They were the king and queen of that paradise, and all was good until the serpent came around and did what? He pointed Eve to the one thing in the garden that had been forbidden her. And he said to her, hey, has God really said you can't eat of that nice-looking tree? You know, God only said that because He doesn't want you to see and know like He sees and knows. That tree will make you equal with God. And so He is selfishly depriving you, Eve. And Eve went for it. Adam too. The fall began when Eve felt herself to be what? Deprived. Here's a sermon. We're depraved because we feel deprived. Feel deprived, become depraved. Poor me, I'm not getting all that I deserve here in the garden. And when someone feels victimized and resentful, that person feels justified in taking from another. Adam and Eve's son, Cain, does the same thing, doesn't he? His brother's offering was accepted by God. Cain's was not, so Cain committed murder. When I feel myself to be overwhelmingly blessed by God, when I can sing of amazing grace for sinners like me, and I mean that, well, the allurements of evil, for me, at that point, have lost their power. But when I think God has been unfair, when I think that I am owed by God, or maybe by society, my conscience is set free to spit on His rules and take what I'm looking at and lusting after as mine. James Boyce writes this about Genesis 3 with reference to that one tree that was off limits. He says, as Adam looked at the tree, it was a great offense to him. The tree stood for limitations on his personal desires. It represented something he was not allowed to have. So Adam said, in effect, that tree is an offense to my autonomy. I do not care if I can eat all the trees north of here, east of here, south of here, west of here. As long as I allow that tree to remain untouched, I feel less than human. I feel diminished. Therefore, I'm going to eat of it and die, whatever that means. Resentment, brothers and sisters, is a curse. Gratitude is a wonderful gift. You would think that these two things, resentment or gratitude, have something to do with a person's outward possessions. But you know what? It doesn't really seem so. Some billionaires are bitter victims. Some prisoners are grateful. It is the perspective. What does one feel one has? What does one feel one is owed? How do you see yourself? How do you see God? The Christian, says Paul, is overflowing with gratitude. I love that language. It's right from Colossians 2 and verse 7. Overflowing with gratitude. That means songs of praise day and night in palaces and in prisons. The gift of gratitude, which must and which will accompany and grow with our grasp of the gospel which Paul is unveiling before us in the book of Romans, is precisely designed to turn entitled, angry, self-righteous sinners into humble, grateful children of God who do give thanks, who do honor God. We went so terribly wrong in the garden, and things have gotten worse since then in so many ways, but Jesus has come to make all things new. beginning with our vision of reality, a reality that includes a God who has revealed himself in creation and to whom we are responsible and unto whom we may look to have restored all that we gave away in our folly and in our rebellion. Okay, we have one more week to swim around in the profound truths of Romans chapter 1. Let's wrap up today with a prayer that I found in Ray Ortland's devotional commentary on the book of Romans. We have it on the screen. The musicians can come on up and get ready to lead us after we recite this together. O holy God, your wrath is neither impulsive nor neurotic nor hypocritical. It is just. It is right. It is fair. We deserve it. Our hypocrisy deserves it. We resort to any clever excuse, however preposterous, to rationalize our guilt. But our evasive tactics only prove, O God, that you are in the right. Never, never, never let me twist your truth into an excuse for allowing my evil. Rid my mind of such devilish thinking while I humble myself before you right now, O Lord. Renew my mind with exalted and reverent thoughts of your righteousness and with a loathing hatred for my own sinfulness. In the holy name of Christ, amen.